Good morning and welcome back. If you're tuning in just now or you're joining us in the room here in Brussels, we are at Politico's AI and Tech Summit in Brussels. I am Laurens Cyrillus. I'm the cybersecurity editor and deputy tech editor at Politico in Europe. And for our next session, we're turning to how AI is overhauling the financial services sector. Financial services firms are exploring new ways of using artificial intelligence, but there's threats to the technology as well. So technology is bringing all sorts of new ways of doing e-commerce, all sorts of new tools like online authentication, etc. But AI itself is also causing a peak in scamming and in fraud. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, the opportunities and the threats. And to do so, I have the pleasure to welcome Charlotte Hogg, Chief Executive Officer for Europe at Visa, to join us today. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Wonderful to have you. And I want to start with Visa's perspective on the transformation that we've seen coming out of AI across the technology sector. So can you give us a bit of a sense of how AI is changing how Visa operates in the financial sector, but maybe also how it's changed your specific job at Visa?
So maybe I'll come at it from a little bit of history and then talk about where we're going next. I mean, the history is that, our job is to assess every transaction for fraud, and we don't have a lot of time to do it, milliseconds. So for about 30 years already, we've been using a variety of techniques including the early sort of evolutions of AI, to assess those transactions, and we continue to do that. I mean, protecting citizens against fraud is one of the most important things that we do. As we look forward, though, the generative AI aspects, I think, are going to be compelling in at least a couple of different ways. One is the ones that I'm sure we're all engaging with, which is the sort of day-to-day productivity, the things you can do internally to get faster at your job, and most importantly in the tech side to speed up some of the productivity around things like coding. The next big area, though, and this is where we made a series of announcements a couple of weeks ago, is how do you think about the role of AI in terms of what we all as people do every day in terms of paying for stuff, but more importantly, the experiences that we're trying to achieve. And I think one of my colleagues has a very nice phrase for this. If you think about the future of agentic commerce, we've probably all got great experiences at the moment about how we're starting to use AI to search for different things. It could be a pair of shoes. I'm taking my mum to Bruges this week, and I wanted to find the right lunch place for us. And the answers you get through AI are just so much better. But then you come to a kind of a grinding halt, and you shift back to an analog world because you've got to book and pay and all these other kinds of things. And so I think the vision for agentic commerce is that experience that we're starting to get in search ceases to be just window shopping and starts to be the full enabled experience in the way that we really want it. And that's what I think we're particularly leaning into now.
That's very interesting, and I guess will also mean like a very concrete way of how people use the internet at large. So what's Visa's role in that new sort of way of doing e-commerce?
So I think, as always, it's about 25 years now since we've been using payments in e-commerce. It's so important that as we lean into this space, and clearly the appetite's there, by the way, there's something like a 1,200% increase in people now using AI for retail experiences. It's so important that the confidence and security that we have in every other aspects of payments that we deliver is then enabled in an AI space. So how do you make it secure? How do you enable tokenization? But also, how do you enable consumers to benefit from that experience, right? I want to be able to, as I'm booking this restaurant, to say, well, I don't want to spend more than X, and it needs to be this kind of a time, and I only want you to book if these conditions take place. That is going to be the kinds of things that Visa Intelligent Commerce is going to enable. So secure, confidence, personalized, tokenized. And I think it's important that the ecosystem as a whole, that all of us lean into that evolution, because what you don't want is the sort of Wild West out there. You want something that we can all have confidence in.
So we've talked a lot this morning already, and we will be talking a lot about the regulatory framework that Europe has set up for these new technologies. To what extent did you have to adapt, or did you have to take into account Europe's regulatory framework and the AI Act when looking at this sort of agentic commerce that you discussed?
I think, we have sort of two levels of how we engage on this topic. One is, of course, the laws that are resident in every country around the world that we operate in, we fulfill. But most importantly, when it comes to things like data protection and some of these other elements, we always take the highest common denominator. So GDPR, for example, is rolled out globally at Visa because it is the highest common denominator. So as we think about things like secure customer authentication, all of that will get built in and needs to have the capability, I think, to continue to evolve with it. But we'll always build that in and take the highest level.
What do you make of the conversation that we've been hearing from some of the partners in the technology sector, that sort of the rules and hurdles that Europe has on technology, that it would hold it back? Have you seen that play out in this case?
Well, I mean, so far in the payments world, you would say that Europe is amongst the most competitive and innovative spaces in which to operate. I mean, just in the past number of years I've been at Visa, the number of domestic wallets we have, for example, it's close to 70 now, I think. The number of domestic schemes. I think Europe should celebrate the level of competition and innovation we have before we start to cast rocks at ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, when you mention competition, my journalistic instinct obliges me to ask about the concerns that have been raised, first within DG Competition at the European Commission about card payment transactions. There's been an ongoing process with the industry, with competitors, and with you and MasterCard about this. So can you tell us anything about your conversations with DG Comp in terms of the transparency around card payments today?
Well, I can't, so I won't. But what I will say is, I think everyone in our space, with the pace of innovation and the change, to do our business well, we have to continue to innovate. We must continue to invest. If I look at the way that the fraud world is changing with AI, unfortunately, it is enabling new forms of scams that we never saw even a couple of years ago. Our job, I think, for Europe and globally is to invest in tools to combat fraud, tools to combat cyber attacks, to evolve with the kind of threats that we see as well. So I think Europe is a very competitive market. We should embrace that, but we should never think we're done. And certainly as a company, we should never think we're done investing in these spaces. I think we've spent about 12 billion over the last 5 years just on fraud and security. I would fully expect that level of investment is going to be continued in the future because it has to be.
And in terms of card payments, still setting aside sort of what's happening at DG Comp, there's also talk, among EU governments and within the Commission about increasing transparency obligations, at least, including in new payment rules. Would you welcome such new transparency obligations?
I think transparency is actually always helpful in a market, and I think it has to be a combination of both. In payments, the total cost of acceptance, but also the total value. We deliver pretty much 6 nines of availability for the ecosystem. That's less than 5 seconds of outage a year. I think merchants should know that. And over time, that value as well as the cost should be more transparent to them. That said, we live in an ecosystem. Our partners are the acquirers and the issuers, and so we're working really hard with them to make sure that as partners, they get to see and understand what they're paying for their transactions and indeed what they're charging their merchants over time.
So you would welcome that system?
Transparency is always good, and I think voluntarily we've already moved quite a long way.
Let me turn to another idea that has gotten a lot of attention in Brussels, but also in Frankfurt, which is the idea of a digital euro project that the European Central Bank has been pushing for quite a while now. And just recently we've had Christine Lagarde speak out and basically calling for a sense of urgency on this as well. The sense of urgency in part seems to be coming from the sense in Europe that it needs to be creating its own technologies in order to become less reliable on US technology. And that is sort of the new element here. But I do want to ask you, I mean, first of all, a digital euro, as we've sort of seen it being envisioned, would that be a competitor to Visa, or to what extent do you see yourself cooperating within that sort of ecosystem?
So I do think it's important for central banks to engage and explore technology. My previous job, a long time ago now, was at the Bank of England, and we were the first, actually, to run a pilot on how to think about central bank digital currencies and how to use the technology that's emerging. And so there's no question that the work the ECB and others are doing to engage in this topic is really important. The thing I said when I was at the bank, and I'd say again now, is part of this, of course, is technical and policy-based, and that's for the policymakers. Part of it is operational. And working at an institution like Visa with the kinds of sums of investment that I've talked about, I think we have to recognize that to do any of these things for consumers and citizens well, to create the confidence in financial stability that is so vital for an economic growth, is you've got to lean in and understand the operational, technical, and investment requirements, not just building it, but maintaining it, that come alongside. And we always welcome, the opportunity to share and contribute to discussions because we have some real experience of what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. Are you getting your message across with the European Central Bank and with the EU in general on the digital euro aspect specifically?
I think we've always engaged with all regulators and continue to do so on the thing that we deliver that's so important for financial stability, which is resilience. So anywhere I go, I think it's important that we engage on that topic, and we're always ready to share.
What do you make of the argument that this is sort of driven by a need for tech sovereignty? And I guess more generally, how do you see sort of the message increasing from Brussels on, Europe needs to become tech sovereign, which essentially means it needs to be creating alternatives, it needs to be pivoting and investing in fundamentally European technology?
At the end of the day, my job is not as a policymaker. It's as a business person. And as a business person, I'd say a couple of things. One is, Europe is very competitive today. I don't think we need to beat ourselves up for not having a competitive enough landscape. We do. And the other thing is that we must continue to focus on how we all, as across the ecosystem, regulators and participants alike, stand up to fraud. The kind of patterns of frauds that you see emerging in all terms of payment systems are worrying. And we need to figure out how we aligned and invest against that.
Mm-hmm. Let's quickly talk about the impact that AI has had on security and trust and cybersecurity. I'm cybersecurity editor. I work with a team that covers some of these incidents. And what we've clearly seen in the data and what we've clearly seen in the reporting is that when it comes to scamming and fraud, it's had a massive impact. And I think that plays out in many, many different ways. Just want to get your perspective on, first of all, how that threat landscape has changed, like how the threat of fraud and scamming has changed specifically as a consequence of AI.
I mean, the nature of many of the frauds are changing, right? Your ability to componentize fraud, fraud as a service, the kind of solutions you see on the dark web, the range of languages that people can use, the ability to impersonate people, all of that has massively changed. I think some things are the same. Fraud and cybersecurity is a global problem. In the same way that people tend not to burgle their neighbor, cybersecurity attacks and fraud attacks come from all over the world, including from outside Europe. So I am a huge believer that we need to continue to be able to use all the global data sources we can to defend Europe against cybersecurity attacks and fraud attacks. I think that's a vital thing to hold on to. I also think that we should be careful of creating any single points of failure, and that greater resilience planning and engagement is going to be vital. I know that we're blessed at Visa in that we have cybersecurity teams all over the world, 2 sites on all over the world, day and night, 3 as we need them. And I think that level of thinking and that ability to think globally when it comes to defending locally is something we need to hold on to.
And if we look at sort of the concrete ways that this is playing out, we've covered in the past one case where a CEO's voice was cloned to be used in telephone conversations in order to get his financial team to wire money that shouldn't be wired. I personally, just a couple of days ago, got a robocall posing as a bank. This was not with an AI cloned voice, and it's quite an old technique, but it's clear that it's all out there. And so, I mean, what do you consider the most sort of threatening of these cases?
I mean, I think in general, it's the number of use cases and the speed at which it shifts. So we are continuously identifying new fraud cases that emerge in one part of the world and making sure we roll it out globally to the whole system in order to block transactions. But it's the pace. You know, one of the things I always think is ironic that if you're a fraudster buying the different components of a scam online, you're required to use 3-factor authentication. Like, they know who they're dealing with. So the thing I think is important is that the good guys in the system, the regulators, the businesses, consumers and merchants, need to work in an aligned way to prevent fraud rather than deal with it when it comes, and that we are going to need to stand up to fraud holistically and collectively, because sure as heck the fraudsters are doing that on the other side.
Thank you. I'm afraid that's all the time we have, but it's been a very engaging conversation. Thank you so much, Charlotte Hogg, Chief Executive Officer for Europe at Visa. I'd like the audience to stay seated, please. So glad that we have a packed room. Please keep it packed, because our next panel will start immediately after this one. It will be moderated by Peter Haak, our senior technology reporter, and he'll lead a policy spotlight discussion on supercharging European AI, what infrastructure is needed. Thank you so much.